Today's webinar is the FDA's new approach to medical inspections, what medical teams need to know now. The webinar today is brought to you by Grand Avenue Software with our special guest from QRx Partners. Today's topic is all about how the FDA shift to the new quality management system regulation, QMSR as everyone knows, is shaping medical device inspections. We've got a 1 hour agenda today that will include introductions, a lively discussion, and if time, we'll have a Q&A. We'll open that up to everyone. The Q&A is where you can post your questions and we'll see those. The chat is where you can put questions that everyone on the webinar will see. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve Cohen, Vice President at Grand Avenue Software.
Thank you, Nancy. Great to be here. Excited for this conversation. I know everybody it's top of mind for folks in our industry as to what's going on and importantly, what the FDA is doing right now. I am the Vice President of Operations here at Grand Avenue, and I am very fortunate to work with our customer success team, so support and implementation and training, who work with our customers to stay compliant. And we are joined today by two esteemed colleagues from one of our partner organizations, QRx Partners, who we work with and share many clients in trying to, again, induce quality and keep people compliant. I will let them introduce themselves. Why don't we start with you, Steve?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thanks for having us on today. I'm Steve Gompertz, one of the partners in QRx Partners. We are a Twin Cities-based global consultancy that, as the letters might imply, focuses on providing guidance on quality and regulatory for typically for early stage and other small to medium-sized MedTech companies. And just for myself, I've been in the MedTech industry now 35 years.
Mark?
Hi, it's Mark Swanson. I think I'm going to start with a disclaimer because I see all the recorders and all that kind of stuff. We are not with the FDA. We are consultants as we operate within mainly the medical device space. We do also support combination products, some pharmaceutical and that kind of stuff. I've been in the medical device industry just over 26 years now. Started at the small little company Medtronic for a little more than a decade there. And then I've been independent consulting now for about 14 years. Steve and I started QRx Partners just over 6 years ago, Steve. We're just kind of trucking along, really enjoying what's going on. I just got back from ASQ's World Conference on Quality and Improvement, WCQI, and in Orlando. And heard a lot of the stuff from down there, as well as what's going on with our clients and customers as we interface with the FDA. So looking forward to having this conversation, making sure that people understand where FDA is going, and hopefully make sure that they stay out of trouble. So go ahead, Steve.
Thanks.
Yep.
So let's start. We all know that back in February, the FDA made a regulatory change, replacing QSR with QMSR. And we are here today to talk about what that means in practice. But Mark, maybe you could kick us off by explaining what QSR was. Yep. And what the FDA was hoping to achieve with this change.
Yeah, I think I've had it beaten out of me enough that I can't say QSR. I have to say QS Reg. So the quality system regulation, and people colloquial, we refer to it as 820, the QS Reg, QSR, that kind of stuff. That's where FDA started in 1998, and working through what the regulations were, added pieces in design controls and that kind of stuff. But it's about having a quality management system, having a way of operating so that you have a high probability of producing good product, meaning safe and effective. Under QMSR, they adopted the requirements of ISO 13485. And so it really isn't that much of a change. but it updates and moves along. The last edition of 1345 that I helped write came out in 2016. So obviously, a lot of years going on and updating. People, and we'll talk about some of the things that are updated in it and bring us along. But rather than rewrite all of the requirements, they just said, go look at that book over there that's called ISO 13485. And so bring it along, and it really harmonizes with the rest of the world. All of these types of things that bring us good things so that we don't have to operate by different rules in different geographies so much anymore. So that's kind of the quick version of that.
Right. So among the things that have happened is there have been some name changes, like DHF to DDF, Design Development File. Steve, two-part question. Will you get in trouble if you use the old names, either in an audit or in your documentation? And what, if any, are the substantive changes hiding behind those name changes?
Yeah, it's funny. This is like the number one question when we've done these things. When I attend other events around these or read articles, it's always the first thing that comes up, right? And I suppose it's because it's just the most obvious that the acronyms have now changed and the record types.
We all live by our TLAs.
Yeah, we go.
Yes.
Exactly, right? And then we run
Three-letter
out of
acronyms.
letters and we go to FLAs, right?
Yeah.
So sorry, 3-letter acronyms, 4-letter acronyms. Everybody's not tagging along here. And the reality is there's never been a requirement to call anything the same as what's in the regs. It certainly makes it easier to understand and explain to others, right? If you use the same terminology. But there was never a requirement that you had to call it a DHF and a DMR and a DHR. And so likewise, there's no requirement that you now suddenly have to go back and go, oh, I have to go find all the occurrences of DHF and change them to DDF. And I always joke, I said, if you want to call it Bob, go ahead. The key is, where do you define what Bob is? And so in your procedures, your record controls, your document controls procedure, you need to lay out, here is our understanding or what we, consider a design and development file. And, I heard a good one yesterday. Somebody said, yeah, so going forward, yeah, we are going to call them DDFs, but we've made sure in our procedure that we say the DDF comprises these records, which includes our legacy DHFs and anything else that might be needed to conform to the definition of a DDF. The good news is there is a pretty tight alignment between a DHF and a DDF. They are pretty much identical. Between the DMR, the device master record, and now the medical device file, also very close. But what I'm finding with our clients is there's just one extra requirement, and that is that your things like your intended use have to be documented. And a lot of times that information spread out throughout the quality system. And then when somebody goes, oh, I have to actually point to it now, how would I do that? Because I've got piece here, piece here, piece there, right? And it would say, well, you may want to start considering creating an intended use document that is the anchor for what your device is. And now you can, and from a doc control perspective, now you can just reference that instead of repeating the information in different places, which I'm always a bigger fan of.
So, Mark, you mentioned change control as being a little different. How is that being evaluated differently under QMSR, transactionally or as a system? And how is this different from document control, which is something that has always been sort of core to quality systems?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I just wanted to add a little bit to what Steve was just talking about with regard to the requirements. Again, it's clear that you need to understand what the requirements are, and whatever you call them, that's fine. Now, one of the things is, if people had the references to the QS reg within their documents, so 820.30 would be design controls. 820.198 would be complaint handling. That stuff is gone now. The new QMSR, and what I didn't say earlier is new QMSR uses the same 820 part of the regulation, and so it's just been renumbered along that. So you really need to get rid of the numbers and just refer to the requirements rather than a part of the regulation number. That's just a clarification. Now, with regard to change control and document control or records control, this is where a bunch of the people are getting hit on the piece on risk, because and this is, again, many people are talking about the differences now on how FDA is using that four-letter word risk in a different way. And much of what we're seeing is you need to understand where the risk is within your organization, and often it comes in changes. And so maintaining your documents up to date in document control, but especially assessing changes for the impact on the product, and understanding what risks there are that come from that. You need to document that adequately, and make sure that you've taken that into account, because that's where we're seeing a lot of people get their audit observations is in that risk area as they make changes and they haven't appropriately assessed that. And Steve will often, and I remember seeing one of his posts on with regard to warning letters. You can't just look forward and say what's happening to the product that I'm changing. You have to look backwards and say, what's the impact on the product that's still in the field? If I need to make a software change, if I'm doing a hardware change, I have to assess my product that's in the field to say, do I need to go make that change to that product that's in the field? In essence, do a recall. Okay. And all of that has to be assessed as part of your product change. Whereas document control is just changing documents, right? Keeping those up to date.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could add, I actually did a Quality Heretic video on this recently, the difference between change control and document control. And I always liken it to, right, change control is the overall story it's a project. You're trying to achieve certain objectives. One of the activities to get to those objectives will be updating documentation, right? Because if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. But they are not one and the same. Document change control is a subset of the overall change management. And as Mark alluded to, where you have to consider what are the impacts in terms of risks, right? What's the full scope of this, both forward and backward, that kind of thing. And I think what's really telling is, and if the audience hasn't yet, you should be downloading FDA's new inspection program manuals where they tell you how they're going to conduct inspections. And the one for medical devices, when you look at their game plan, it always starts with change management, right? In the old days, it was CAPA. Now they're saying we're going to start asking about how you handle change. And to Mark's point, the next thing they're going to ask about is tell us how you assess the risks.
On that point, Steve, there's in the old regs, as you were noting, Mark, different sections, complaint handling and CAPA and there are these pieces, functional pieces of a quality system. Where does the FDA start now with those processes? Are they looking at the individual processes? Are they focusing on one more than another now, or is it a very different approach?
Yeah, and I can start chiming in. So, I mean, Steve just alluded to that they're starting with change controls.
Right.
They're understanding, because that's where the risk is. When you make changes to your product, that you have the appropriate design reviews, you have the appropriate verifications and validations. You've assessed the risk to, again, the product in the field as well as your product going forward. All of those things, that's where the biggest area is. The next biggest area that we're seeing a lot of effort into is supplier controls. And again, these are risk-based things, because they see a lot of the issues come from your lack of management of suppliers. Now, people will say our suppliers are causing the problem. No. You have to understand your organization is responsible for the work your suppliers do for you, and you have to adequately control that, whether that's receiving inspection, on-site, quality system audits and inspections, source inspection, all of those things, including specifically, because 1340 has it in there, the written quality agreements, and making sure that you've managed the risk through that, and understanding now The other thing that they're looking at with that directly is your process risk analysis, or what a lot of people will talk the PFMEAs, but your process risk analysis, that you're responsible for the risks in those processes as well, and making sure that the risks have been adequately assessed and controlled.
So what's the status of the checklist? Right, that was kind of always the heart of your audit prep and to some degree the quality system. Has the inspection model shifted from that approach to something more systems oriented or narrative?
Steve, you want to take that one, or you want me to?
Yeah, no, I was just I should have done this at first. I was just pulling up the inspection program manual, but
I figure you were
the
doing
checklist approach is kind of dead at this point, right? Because the original 820 was written against the pre-2000 versions of the ISO 9000 standards, right? When it was all functionally oriented, and so it looked like a checklist, right? And then in 2000, right, the process model was introduced, right? 9001 got updated to introduce the process approach. What was it, 3-4 years later, 1345 gets updated as well to follow the process approach. Everybody's doing the process approach except FDA, which is kind of, I think, why they call them inspections rather than audits, right? Because inspection just means I'm going to look at a bunch of stuff and check them off the list. And over time, FDA started to realize they were kind of encouraging the wrong behaviors because everybody was just focused on, just tell me what I got to check off the list, right? Because that's where compliance lives. And the reality is, yeah, but that's not really what FDA cares about. I mean, if that sounds weird, they actually want you to have an effective quality system, right? And that is things like, is it a system? Is it interconnected, right? Process thinking, risk-based thinking. And so, really what this says that they are now referencing 1345 says they're now going to apply the same thinking. When you look at the inspection program manuals, they've made that very clear that they have retrained, and we're hearing this from our clients who are already going through FDA inspections, that yes, it is a different experience than it used to be. They sound more like your notified body auditors in their approach. They want to follow the trail of things. So I'm looking at what they call inspection model 1, which is kind of like your surveillance audits or inspections. And again, they start with change control, and then they go right into design and development, right? In the old days, it was go into CAPA, now start diving into all kinds of records, right? All the checklist kind of stuff, and eventually get to the processes if they really ever got there, right?
Complaints
But
and
now,
looking for complaints and looking for problems, looking for issues,
yeah,
those types of things. And for
yeah,
sure
show
now,
me 3 years of complaint records. Show me 3 years of calibration records. That's not how they're approaching this anymore, right? They're asking from the start, all right, so what kind of changes have you implemented recently? All right, let's follow that through. How did you handle that? How did you assess the risks? How did you ensure the actions were completed? How did you ensure they were effective relative to the original goal? Did you have an original goal? Right? Which are actually probably harder questions for a lot of organizations to answer because they're used to just, I have this checklist. Look, I did everything, right? Now they want to know, tell me how. Tell me your thinking during that, right? Very different approach.
And they're taking much of that from the experience with the MDSAP, the Medical Device Single Audit Program model, and the audit approach. By the way, if you haven't downloaded the new audit approach, it was updated on February 2nd as well to take in the new parts of 820. So that audit approach exists out there still. And because FDA had such a strong hand in writing the MDSAP audit approach, they are using that in training their inspectors. As well as that's why they have a much more looking like the notified bodies perspective in looking at these. They're looking for that interrelationship of the quality management system processes. That and that's why I say when change control comes in, they're automatically looking at document controls. When they're looking at design history file and design and development, they're already looking at document records controls. They're getting all of these pieces in the same way that the notified bodies were getting that. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, the other piece of advice I would give around this, right? So Mark alluded to, a lot of things besides 820 changing, things that reference the old 820 are changing, like the MDSAP audit approach. We're seeing guidance documents being updated, to reflect this, and other regulations that pointed to at parts of 820 are also being updated at the same time. So you can't just download 820 and think, oh, I've got what I need. There's a lot of different things. And what we've been talking about, Mark and I have talked about this for a long time, but I've been doing it a lot in my talks recently. When you pull up 1345, it's time to read those sections that you always skipped past. Right? Right. Yeah. Everybody jumps into 1345, and I know where you go. You go right to clause 4, right? 4 through 8, because that's where the action is, baby, right? And it's like, yeah, well, you know what? There's a section 0, and 0 is what establishes all the foundational information. And so I've been telling people is you can't understand clauses 4 through 8 if you don't read clauses 0 through 3.
Yeah.
So pull up your copy of the standard and read those sections.
And I would take you back, even though we, the QMSR doesn't update to the coming version of 9000. 1345 does use ISO 9000 as its normative reference. And people will often just say, well, that's the definitions document. Yes, but there's quality management principles in there. There's key concepts and those types of things. While the coming, again, it doesn't update to the coming edition, which will be probably published this next week of the 2026 version of 9000. It takes the quality principles from the 5 up to 22. There's a lot more explanation and that creating that foundation of quality management systems. If you understand those concepts, you honestly, you probably don't need to worry about the requirements because you'll meet them because you're understanding the concepts of quality management. And then the next step, going to integrated management systems. That's why, talk about environmental. Obviously, FDA has concerns about things like sterilization and ETO. Are you doing things about that to shift over to a different sterilization method? These are the things that can get asked now as you talk about, what you've created your requirements. The thing I'll finish up with is Steve referenced guidance documents and that kind of stuff. They truly are guidance documents, so they aren't requirements. Just like the notes, just like the guidance document 23485 that will come out. Okay. But a couple of things. If you put it in your processes to do it that way, you now have to do it that way. You can get a non-conformance to your own processes, right? Mm-hmm. And second of all, if you don't follow the guidance, how the heck else are you going to do it? If the experts have told you this is the way to do it, why would you not do it that way?
Yeah, I always like to joke that I don't think FDA understands what the word guidance means because they do expect you to follow their guidance. The other thing I was going to point out, relative to ISO 9000, if you're paying attention in the new 820, they aren't just incorporating 1345 by reference. They also note that they are incorporating 9000. Right.
Section 3.
Understanding those fundamentals that are laid out in ISO 9000 is now an underpinning for how FDA looks at this as well. And that's kind of similar to what I talked about in section 0 of 1345.
So let's say you're someone possibly like yourselves who's been at this for a long time. Quality is in your bones. You do take a risk-based approach. You feel like you've got a good quality system. And by that, I mean, your procedures are good, your documentation is good, but you've been subject to audits for a long time, right? Audits, inspections. What are you being surprised by? What coming into the recent audits have you found, or your clients really have found, wow, I wasn't expecting that question. I wasn't quite prepared to give an answer.
I'd like to think we've prepared our clients well.
Of course, your clients.
And so we are hearing good stories.
Yeah.
I don't know so much that it was a particular question. It was the way in which the inspectors acted. And we had 2 clients we spoke to who gave us the same story of 2 different inspectors that I thought was really telling. And they both noted, yeah, you know what? There were several points in the inspection where the inspector closed their notebook and put their pen down and just started a conversation. That's very different than what you would have seen in the past, right? And they said it looked like a clear message to us that it was okay to speak out loud, right? And that I'm not writing this down, right? Kind of thing. So a very different approach, and so I think that's a good thing, right? And I think they also viewed it as a good thing, but they were really stunned. And, of course, the first thought is this a trick? Right? We know they're well trained in interrogation techniques, and they trying to do the buddy buddy. Where's the bad cop going to come in next, right? If that's the good cop. But the fact that we heard it twice, involving two different, inspectors was interesting from that perspective. I haven't heard kind of like any sort of, oh, geez, yeah, we didn't think about them asking that type of question. It was more just like I said, get ready for they're not going to ask you the checklist kind of stuff. They may do that later, but first they want to understand the process, and then they may say, all right, can you show me a couple of records, that show that that's actually what you did? But I haven't heard anybody saying, yeah, they want that 3 years of records thing, and we're going to do an analysis of it.
No. And I think so. The one that just comes up to my mind is that the way that they ask the risk question. So the question goes more along the lines of, where is the biggest risk in your processes? And they're like, well, what do you mean the biggest risk?
That's a good one.
So that's they're asking it in that different way to understand, have you really thought about what's your biggest potential problem? And have you put enough controls around that biggest problem? Because it should be, in essence, the question is, how are you focusing your resources on the areas of the biggest potential problem? And so it's much more in that, again, the direct management of it, and the management system, and helping the management system focus your efforts to those areas of the largest concern, the largest risk. And asking it in that way is really different for the FDA. Usually they're coming, like Steve has said, they're coming in and they already know where the focus areas have to be. They're coming much more into, hey, this is your system to manage, and we want to know that you're managing it correctly. Not, we're going to tell you how to manage it.
So let's go a little deeper, because you mentioned that risk is at the heart of the new regime several times. Ideally, it's in people's heads, but the old saying, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. So what do companies need to do to be prepared for this new approach with regard specifically to this risk-based approach?
Yeah. This is something that I talk about all the time. People confuse that four-letter word in the different areas. Product risk is different than risk-based approach to the controls of your quality management system processes. In fact, you need to have the risk-based approach to risk within your product risk, and
risk
understanding understanding where the largest risks are. Again, risk-based approach doesn't require a formal evaluation. You don't sit there and say, what's the hazard? What's the hazard situation? What's the severity? No. Where is the risk? It's just a simple question, because they want to get rid of the arbitrary approach. For instance, we would say often have management review annually. Why? Why is it annually? Why is that enough? Should it be quarterly? Should it be monthly? Should there be some other meetings in between that you're helping to manage that risk within that process? Hopefully that's making sense, that it's no longer, hey, we calibrate it annually because that's what the manufacturer recommended. No, what's the actual use? How much product is being measured? How much product is at risk between those calibrations that you're doing for the check and the check afterwards, to make sure the measurements in between were good? How much risk are you willing to tolerate? Those types of things. That's the risk question, is how are you managing the organizational risk? Not how you're managing your product risk. That's a given. That's you have to do that. You have to reduce that as far as possible. But your organization has to manage all of the risks within the organization and work towards continual improvement, not just sit back on your laurels. This is, again, some of these pieces. Do you have the right competence? Do you have the right suppliers with the right competencies? All of those in control. Now, are you following that up? when you get complaints and issues are reported, are you proactively seeking the information? Are you using that in an investigation? Are you then driving either product improvements or those types of decisions from that? Or is it just falling on deaf ears? And if it's those types of things, I think they're taking much more of the approach that Steve and I have taken in auditing, where they're looking for the evidence of conformity. They're not looking for the problems. They're not trying to write nonconformances. They're trying to understand how are you maintaining a system that gives you that highest probability of making good product. Okay.
Are there, so either that you've seen or that you've heard any new risk areas? Risk from the company's perspective with regard to findings? Like, are there things that
Steve,
that companies should be paying a little more
use.
attention to?
I'm sorry, what was that, Mark? I couldn't
talk about the AI use and
yeah.
Oh yeah, well that
was
was everybody's a buzz about that, right?
Yeah.
That warning letter that came out week before last. And if people aren't familiar with it, it was sort of the first time FDA blasted somebody for their use of AI.
Right.
And it wasn't that FDA is a problem with you using AI. It was that a company completely took the human out of the loop, in that they let their AI create their QMS, all the procedures, all the everything. And of course it was flawed because nobody had bothered checking, and they weren't following it anyway. So they didn't have this one do it, which just led FDA to go on, well, why did you create this? And you're missing this and all this stuff. And unfortunately, their response to the 483 observations, when what got them the warning letter, was they essentially came back and said, well, the AI didn't point out that we were missing that. So they admitted they completely divorce themselves from responsibility for the QMS, right? And there is that requirement in 1345, right? You have to demonstrate management commitment. They clearly were not committed to the quality system. So I think that one is pretty telling, and it just shows FDA is aware of what we're doing with these tools and these technologies, and they are going to have expectations that we apply them responsibly.
And I was just looking at the chat, and there was a question about the AI tools and the use in their internal processes. So, I mean, FDA, and we've seen this, is no doubt using AI tools with doing, reviews of 510Ks, reviews of product information, that kind of stuff. They're using the AI tools to do searches for information. They use their AI tools now to look at your websites, look at the social media, and scrape that kind of stuff out there, because the AI tools are really good at retrieving that data and that information. We have not seen them at all using AI tools on site. So when the inspectors are coming out, they are not utilizing any of the AI tools to help them, but they could be using those, again, before they come on site. Don't miss this, that inspectors prepare for coming on site. They've looked at your information, they've looked at your website, they've looked at your products, your product advertisements and those types of things. So they understand a lot about your company before they come on site. So don't miss that. And they're likely using those AI tools to help with that research. That's what most of us do now. I mean, it used to be the thing to Google something, right? Now it's put it in ChatGPT or Copilot, and that's what conducts my search for things, because it scrapes a lot more information and puts it in, brings it back to us in the context that we ask for.
It's a good, you raised a good point that they're not bringing those tools on site. No. But if you're in a paper-based system, an AI tool from the FDA wouldn't help very much, right? You can't, today at least, you can't release the robots into your file cabinet. Yeah. But what can we learn from the new inspection outcomes, comparing paper-based systems with electronic systems like Grand Avenue? I mean, in the sense that, what do you?
I think both of us paused waiting for each other, so I think there's some answers. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I apologize. I was reading some of the chat questions to see if there's something we missed there. So I apologize, Steve. I didn't hear your question.
No, I'll go on, Steve. You can take
yeah, go ahead. Mark's got it.
So,
it's a shameless plug.
I mean, whether it's Grand Avenue or other QMSs, I'll say, So just a couple of things. First of all, and this was, of course, under the old system, under QSIT. I've done inspections under paper-based system, and I've done inspections using electronic systems. Particularly, the one client was Grand Avenue. The first one was the paper-based one. They said they were going to be there for the week. They ended up being there for a little more than a week and a half, looking through papers, looking through documents, and came out of that with 483 observations. Okay. And just looking through a lot of detail. The second one, using Grand Avenue, using an electronic system, she told us that she was going to be there for the week, 5 days. After day 2, she said, "I have a half a day tomorrow, and I should finish up." Okay.
Right.
So using electronic systems made it a lot more efficient. As she was asking for documents, I was able to bring it up in the system and then drag it over to the screen that she could view. And so it kept everything moving along very swiftly. She didn't have a lot of time to sit there and look at, continue to look at the papers because she's on a time standard as well. Everybody should be familiar with the time standard from MDSAP audit models, and that kind of stuff. So those types of things. So bringing up those electronic systems and being able to find it. Now, I'm going to bring in also, I know we're talking mainly about US stuff and QMSR, but the medical device regulation from Europe specifically says your technical documentation must be searchable. How do you search paper?
Right.
You can't. And so if you're intending on meeting the requirements of the medical device regulation, you at least have to scan everything. But you would be much better served by having an electronic document control system. And just move that way. I mean, with remote work, getting remote signatures. I mean, during COVID, how did you get signatures on paper when it's sitting there at the office and nobody's there? So, I mean, there's all of these things. There's no doubt that having electronic systems will help you. Do not be afraid to show that to the inspector, because that shows efficiency. They understand that you have things under control. I can't tell you how many times. I mean, because most of the time it takes your document control and records control processes off the table because you have an electronic system that forces you to be compliant, that meets Part 11, all of those types of things. So if that's the question, there's no doubt having that system. Now, the other side of that is, of course, well, FDA doesn't ask for direct access, so they're not doing the searches, right? They don't have access to your system. Even if they were using AI tools, that's not public information. Grand Avenue keeps it on a server secure from outside searches. So you should have no fear of that. They're not going to do that. As far as I know, they've never asked for direct access to the system. They will always allow us to interface with it, find the documents they're asking for, and show it to them. Right? Now, it's whether or not we've actually updated the documents and all those types of things. The documents that are there are current. Again, that's change control, document control, records control, all of those types of things. But people get off the paper. That's all I can say. Get off the paper and get into the current day.
Yeah.
I would, in order to redeem myself, because I said I was reading the chat comments, there is one I think that kind of segues off of this pretty well. Somebody made more of a comment. They said they've seen that the FDA is only performing one-day audits, which are mostly unannounced for mostly smaller, fairly compliant companies. Mark, I don't know what you've heard. I'm not hearing that, and that would seem to kind of fly in the face of their normal approach, especially for unannounced.
No, they are doing this,
okay.
And they actually term it more of a survey than a true inspection. But they will do a single day or half day surveys where they're just asking some basic questions and come in, and if the questions are answered, there's no reason for them to come.
Okay. I didn't tie it to that. I was aware of that. Okay.
They're doing that with people that are MDSAP as well. So, I mean, MDSAP generally exempts you from the normal routine audit or routine inspection thing. But they are doing that with people that are MDSAP as well. They'll do that single day survey. And so, I mean, it's very quick. It's just and because this is the question, right? I can't tell you again how many times people have asked me, when you're auditing or assessing, how long does it take you to know if the system's good? About 10 minutes. I mean, when you ask the first questions, then people go, "Oh," you understand that they might not have the best control of their system. On the other side, if they're handing you or finishing your question for you and handing, you're good. Okay, we know this is going to go good, right? And so it's that type of thing where they're just doing that survey and see, can you answer these basic questions? If you can, we're going to move on to somebody else, because that's a risk assessment. They're using a risk-based approach to inspections.
I do want to leave some time for some of the questions that are in there, and Nancy will help us with that. I know she's been keeping an eye on that. But last question from me: once the dust settles, will this have been a good change for the industry in your mind? Are you already seeing that the FDA is being, in some sense or another, more effective in having made this change?
I was going to say
I'll
more.
go first. My opinion is yes. This is what we've wanted for a long time, right? Because they're getting to what's really important, right? Yeah, it's important to have good records and 3 years of calibration. That's correct, but it's right again. It's called a system for a reason, right? Again, all that foundational stuff about process thinking and risk-based thinking, that's what makes it work, right? And be effective. And so it's great that FDA is now understanding that's the first thing that they should confirm. And then if the red flags go up, then they can do the deeper dive and dig into, okay, now I want to see three years of this, right? Because you don't seem to understand. You can't describe for me how you're doing that. Now you're managing risk. So now I have no confidence, and therefore now you're going to prove it to me. But it makes everything more efficient, right? So FDA doesn't have to be there as many days as we've talked about, or they could at least start with these surveys where they're just going to call you up and ask you some basic questions. I think this is all good. It's less burdensome, but it, in the same time, gets to what's really important.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that FDA wants to focus on, the things that are going to have the impact on improving safety and performance. I mean, I tell people all the time, lots of people treat FDA as adversarial, but if you think about it, they have exactly the same goal as we do, that patients get helped with safe and effective product, that safety and performance is the paramount thing. And so they're just asking questions to assess that. And if they do that in a more user-friendly way, I think this is positive. Maybe we can repair some of those relationships that industry has had with the agency. Again, I'll say the disclaimer: Steve and I are not from the agency. Neither one of us has ever worked for the agency, but we know a lot of people that are there. And yes, to some extent right now, the work environment for many of them is not as good as it has been in the past, and they've lost a lot of legacy people there. Kim Troutman's not there anymore. Rob, there's a lot of people. The FDA and commissioner just resigned last week. That turnover.
We could do a whole nother hour on what's happening.
There's been a huge amount of turnover, which, as anybody understands, that creates turmoil in the organization, but it also creates opportunity. It creates opportunity to have better relationships, to be more transparent, to have a better understanding of how you're impacting safety and performance of your product. That's why I say the questions are, where's your risk? And you come back to, why are they doing these short things? Because risk-based approach was meant to help you manage your resources. You don't have unlimited resources, so you have to focus your resources where the risk is at. And that's why I say, stop focusing yourself on retaining paper and be able to search documents and that kind of stuff, because those things can take a long time. Use some sort of mechanism to do that, and those types of things. So we're glad to help out with that. We're glad to help you understand. As we always say, we're open to any questions. So I guess with that, we can probably go up to and see if there's any questions.
Speaking of questions, all right,
Yeah.
Nancy, what have you got out there?
Absolutely. Let's get into the questions. All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great.
Okay. We have a whole bunch of questions, so we might need to move a little bit quick through these, but Sarah had a question. Have you seen any instances where the FDA have a different or unusual understanding of the ISO regulations?
Because I'm on the ISO working group, this is I've done into this a lot. In fact, it was one of the pointed out in the MDSAP audit approach. There's a requirement for competence. The organization outlined the competence, and then you show that the competence requirements are met. And then if you look in the MDSAP audit approach, it's all about training and training records. And so this is an area that we've had some discussion on, that they need to focus more on the competence. That was always the intention, even back to the QS reg, but it was less than clear in that. And some of the times the training wasn't so great in helping people understand how do you assess competence and that kind of stuff. So that's an area. The other area that I'd go into is that concept of risk. Risk and risk management, product risk in product realization, has to do with FMEAs and doing the full risk analysis, the whole risk management file. Okay. Whereas the risk-based approach that's in 412B, I know exactly where it's at because we asked so many times about it, in 1345, that is about controls. And there's no need for a formal process. So if they're asking, sometimes they'll ask you for, what's your process for assessing risk in your quality management system? No, I don't have a process. It should be, how do you do that? Whether it's in management review, design review, your maintenance and calibration, where are you assessing risk and how are you focusing your resources on risk? That's why I say the question, rightly so, and I'll say that we've helped them focus on is, where is the risk in your process? That's a good question, right? I don't know, Steve, if you have anything else you want to add.
No, I think you nailed that really well. So that's good.
Right. The next question is a two-part question. Is FDA still using the term DMR and DHF, even though they are no longer referenced in the regulation? And then the second part is, will companies get in trouble for using legacy terminology, or is demonstrating intent more important regarding terminology?
Yeah, so maybe this person jumped on a little late because we got into that right away. But the first part of the question is, yeah, old habits die hard. So I wouldn't be surprised to hear an inspector ask about your DHF and then go, I mean your DDF, right?
We
I've
do
been
it, so I
part of
know
some,
that they do it.
yeah, right. I've been part of some LinkedIn conversations and people are saying it's going to be so hard to change that vernacular, right? So I get it. I've been on this tear to try to change terminology and stuff like in CAPA, the concept of VOE, which does not exist in any regulation or standard. Nobody's ever going to stop calling it VOE. And it's the same thing, right? So those things will be around for a while. And as we talked about, early on, yeah, it's about the context, the intent. Can you show that, well, what I have, and I said, call it Bob, who cares? Whatever I call it meets the definitions or the requirements of the standard, right? So your procedures need to show where we're doing design and development files, even though we call them Bob, they comprise these things, and that's exactly what's required by the standard.
The other one that comes to mind is people always say continuous improvement because that's what we got into our vernacular somehow.
Right.
That is not, and root cause analysis is the other one that I like to pick on. Neither one of those is in the standards of the regulation. It's continual improvement and it's determined cause. Those are the requirements.
I liken it to, I used to be a basketball referee, and I kind of liken it to when the crowd would shout out at you these non-existent rules that they wanted you to enforce, like over the back.
Yeah.
And I used to do training to parents, and I'd say, oh, you got $50 for anybody who can look through the manual and show me where it talks about over the back fouls.
Yeah.
They don't exist.
Well, that's a good segue into rules and regulations. A few people asked, what's the best way to locate the FDA inspection program checklist? What kind of words should they put into Google, or how can they find those?
Inspection program manual. Just put it in Google. FDA inspection program manual. There are 5 of them. Devices, drugs, biologics, combination products, and I'm missing one. Is it HC? Not HCP. Bloodborne. I can't remember. There's a fifth one there, but right, for each type of thing that FDA is responsible for, they now have an inspection manual. So
And somebody did put
FDA
the
inspection program manual, and you'll find
yeah,
it.
somebody
right
did put the links in the chat too to a couple of those documents.
I did
for
see that
links
earlier,
up.
yeah, at least to the medical device one.
Great. And then Laura asked, doing these short inspections because of staffing shortages and everyone updating their system, so it's more of a check. Are we not using MD SAP, but we are ISO certified? Not sure if you saw that one or got that one.
I did, and that's what I was trying to pick up. Again, FDA, just understand that they're using the risk-based approach to determine where they should spend their inspection resources. They don't have unlimited resources. Even FDA, the government doesn't have unlimited resources. They have a limited number of people. And by the way, and I know a lot of the supervisory people, they're looking for people. So if you're really interested in doing that, you can go work for FDA as an inspector or reviewer or those types of things. USA.gov is go. But they are focusing their resources. This is the same thing we should be doing on our internal audit resources. We don't have unlimited resources, so focus your effort on where the highest risk is. That's why they're asking that question. Where is the risk within your processes? So if you understand that, then you understand where to focus your resources. We all experience that auditors, inspectors come in and ask the questions that they experience. So that's why they ask about auditor certifications, inspector certifications, how they've been trained, because they're now using these resources in understanding where they spend their inspection techniques, including the surveys and those types of things. That's the question. That's what it's doing now. I mean, you can argue that they have limited, don't have enough staffing. I don't think that that's true because they're doing inspections, they're doing foreign inspections, they're doing all the inspections they need to do to keep the product safe. So don't think that they're short on resources. They're just focusing their resources in the same way they expect you to use a risk-based approach. Okay.
One last question. You mentioned PFMEA isn't really the goal of the risk-based audits. Is there a better risk management process record you recommend in place of PFMEAs?
Can I take this up?
Yeah, go ahead.
You can. I know you'll want to jump right on it, though. Yeah, that's another one of my things I've been trying to get people to, at least in MedTech, to just stop always referring to FMEAs and use the term risk analysis. So it's a process risk analysis, a design risk analysis, a use risk analysis. Actually, FDA, in one of its guidance documents, refers to a user-related risk assessment, URRA.
Yeah.
Right? FMEA, the tool, the concept, and how a tool is now. And people go, okay, what's the difference if I do a process risk analysis or a PFMEA? They're going to look almost identical. The concept of it behind an FMEA is fine. It's just that FM piece, failure modes, right? It sets the intent that you're going to focus on what could go wrong. And in medical devices, sometimes they're risky even when everything goes right, right? Think of it. I always use the example of a artificial heart valve. Incredibly risky devices. Why are they on the market? Because we've analyzed the risk and the benefits outweigh those risks, right? But even if everything is perfect, the device was built perfectly, the doctor did the surgery perfectly, you managed to avoid any inspections, it was still incredibly risky to undergo that procedure, right? And that's what risk analysis is supposed to focus on first, is understanding, right? When we talk about like preliminary hazard analysis or PHA, the first thing is understand what is the normal risk for my device just because of what it is. Then, yes, at some point you do want to think about, and what else could go wrong? You kind of move into the FMEA kind of world. Now, but if you lay out a tool, you go, yeah, you know what, the way an FMEA works is pretty good. Just rethink the terminology. Start first with what are the inherent risks at this point in the workflow using the device? What's the inherent risk of how we've designed that component or that function or chosen the materials, right? And then you can also go, okay, and what else could go wrong, right? You know, that reasonably foreseeable misuse kind of concept that you're supposed to look at.
Well, and I want to jump in on this too, because you've both pointed out that there's risk in the device, risk in your design, and then there's the risk in your organization, and that those
Right.
are distinct things. As you noted, planning for product risk is assumed. You know, I don't want to say do away with your FMEA, your risk and traceability analysis. I mean, you have to have that.
Yep.
The question is, do you have a system that is designed to deal with other risks? Like I think you, Steve, had said early on that, or maybe it was you, Mark, that there's a particular attention to supplier controls. Why? Because that's external to your organization, and it can have enormous impact on whether you're introducing
And
additional
it's inherently
risks.
risky because you don't have direct control.
Exactly right.
And FDA doesn't regulate suppliers. They expect you to
Exactly.
control them.
Exactly.
So there's all of these pieces that they see that as a
Right.
risk within the organization. So that's what I want to come back to both Steves, is yes, you have to do process FMEA, design FMEA, use FMEA, whatever you want to call it for your product. But you're not going to do that for your quality management system. You are simply going to say, what could go wrong? Start with that question. What could go wrong? If I'm talking about records, I could lose records. They could be destroyed. They could get, those types of things. How do I prevent that from happening? I have an electronic document control system that they're, stored in and backed up on a regular basis, so we don't lose them. They're stored on multiple servers, so a loss of one doesn't cause the loss of the documents. All those types of things. What could go wrong in CAPA management? Again, the CAPA timeliness comes up. Your corrective action timeliness. So I need to have a regular meeting, maybe a CAPA board, to be able to review and say, are we on time? Do we need additional resources? All of those types of things. Management review, process controls, all of these, every single quality management process, you should be asking what could go wrong, and then do it. Audit. Maybe we don't audit every section. We have limited resources, and we just focus audits. And so maybe you miss something, whether it's 5S or other safety audits, all of these types of things. What could go wrong if we don't do this correctly is that big question to ask. Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this webinar. Thank you to the guys at QRx Partners. If you'd like to get in touch with them, we've got a QR code to their LinkedIn. You can go to their website at QRxPartners.com. Grand Avenue Software, if you'd like to see a smarter EQMS in action, schedule a demo with us and we'll walk you through it. And we've seen so many comments. I've seen so many comments coming through of great information, helpful. The real world examples were so helpful. Yeah, what a great session. So thank you for being here, everyone. And on that, I think we'll call it a successful session.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for everybody who attended.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.